Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's begin the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition, I have chosen 11 important articles for a detailed and comprehensive analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So before we start, I have a couple of important announcements. If you're looking to enroll for our IAS classes, then this would be the right opportune time because Unacademy is offering a flat 55% discount on all our subscriptions, and you can now avail our subscription at just 17,999. And you also get access to CSE Assure. Under CSE Assure, let's say for some reason you don't clear the exam in your first attempt. In that case, your next attempt is entirely on us, absolutely for free. So this offer, I'm told, ends tonight, and you need to enter the code IAS English in order to avail the offer. On the subscription page, you will see a different price. So to avail the discount and CSE Assure, you need to enter the code IAS English. The link is provided in the description, so do check it out for further details. The second big announcement is as part of Conquer Prelims Phase 2, which we are conducting on the Unacademy app. Starting from today, I'll be taking 3 sessions for international relations where we will cover important PYQs and lot of MCQs based on previous year questions. So starting from today, from 21st February at 6:30 p.m. and we'll have classes tomorrow and day after as well. And I urge you to attend these classes without fail. So I'll be discussing lots and lots of MCQs that are based on previous year questions to help you prepare for the upcoming prelims exam. So these classes are essentially conducted on the Unacademy app. So just go to the platform and search for the educator. Search for my name, go to my profile. So under the free classes section, you will be able to find these 3 classes. So do join me live today at 6:30 p.m. for these special classes. Now let's get started and look at the first topic. Yesterday there was a big breaking development. The US Supreme Court, the SCOTUS, has intervened with a major decision against Trump's tariff policies. This is something which has huge implications for the global economy and for India's interests as well. So let's dive deep into this topic, go beyond the article, and understand the implications of this decision of the US Supreme Court. As we all know, since last year, since Trump assumed office for the second time, Trump has targeted almost every country with reciprocal tariffs by blaming the other nations for resorting to unfair trade practices. So, US President had even invoked emergency law, and using this provision, he had levied these tariffs, including the 50% tariffs that were imposed on India. So the matter had reached the Supreme Court at the United States, and now the final ruling has come out. In a 6 is to 3 majority judgment, the Supreme Court has struck down these tariffs as unconstitutional. So now this has serious implications. What will happen for all the tariffs that have already been collected? Will there be a refund issued by the US? Would the Trump administration accept the judgment, or will they find a way to bypass this judgment? What would be the impact of this on the recently announced interim trade agreement between India and US? How would this affect the future trade relations between India and US? That is something we need to explore and understand. So, in this ruling, there were 3 judges who gave a dissenting opinion, but they were, of course, on the minority side. So, these 3 judges who disagreed with the judgment, they were primarily appointed by the Trump administration himself during the first presidency of Donald Trump. These were all the conservative judges in the US Supreme Court bench. But majority of the judges have agreed, and the Chief Justice has written a very detailed statement arguing as to why these tariffs imposed by the Trump administration is against the Constitution. So we need to understand on what basis were these tariffs levied in the first place. See, the US president had invoked an emergency legal provision which is available, known as the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977. Now, this is an extraordinary law under which US president can issue an executive order declaring a national emergency and use that extraordinary power to take economic decisions in order to protect the US economic interests, foreign policy, and national security interests. This law has been used many times in the previous years by former US presidents as well. For example, in 1971, Richard Nixon had used the very same law to bring out around 10% tariffs when US was dealing with a balance of payments crisis. This has been used during the Iranian Revolution and after the Iran hostage crisis. Since then, there have been sanctions placed on Iran through perpetual state of emergency that the US has declared. And this has been renewed multiple times by subsequent governments in the US. Even after 9/11 attacks, the then US President George Bush had declared a national emergency, giving special powers to impose sanctions on terror groups and organizations linked with terrorist entities, such as Al Qaeda. So, there have been several instances where the emergency law has been used by US presidents, but it has never been used to target specific countries with tariffs. It has been primarily used to impose sanctions or to deal with extraordinary economic situations. So, according to congressional research, there are more than 40 such emergencies which are declared and which are in operation, but they were never used previously to target specific countries with import tariffs. So, Donald Trump became the first president to use this extraordinary law and levy tariffs on several countries, including on close US allies such as Canada and European countries. But this raises a key constitutional question as well, because the power of taxation, that includes tariffs as well, lies clearly with the US Congress, according to the US Constitution. The founding fathers in the US had ensured that the power of taxation, which includes the power to impose new import tariffs, it lies clearly with the Congress, not with the US president and the administration. This emergency law is an extraordinary provision available to the US president only to deal with certain specific emergencies. But the Trump administration, it basically justified these tariffs last year, the Liberation Day tariffs, as it was labeled as. They said other countries are threatening the American economic interests by resorting to unfair trade practices. And this constitutes a sort of an economic emergency, a national emergency that affects US security as well. Based on those grounds, the Trump administration has used this extraordinary law to target other countries with these tariffs. So, this was the legal constitutional matter which was being examined by the Supreme Court. The constitutionality of the executive decisions, where such a law is used to essentially expand the jurisdiction of the executive to include the power of taxation, the power of tariffs, which constitutionally lies only with the US Congress. It's like Indian government taking upon itself the power of taxation and stepping into the domain of the parliament or the legislature. That would be seen as unconstitutional. So something similar had happened in the United States. So now the Supreme Court is of the clear opinion that this is unconstitutional. The president doesn't have such powers, and the power lies only with the US Congress. This extraordinary power of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act cannot be used for levying tariffs. But now there are two big questions to be answered. What happens next? Point number one: will there be a refund on all the tariffs that were collected last year? Because data shows that until December, more than $133 billion in tax revenue has been collected by the US Treasury. And according to latest data, the numbers could be crossing $150 billion, getting close to $200 billion as well. The additional revenue collected by US would be somewhere in the range of 150 to $200 billion. Now, even if we take the conservative number of 130 to $150 billion, this is a massive sum of money. So these tariffs have been primarily paid by the importers who imported goods, products into the US market. So many US companies and the wholesale companies which operate in the US, which import goods from across the world, they have already filed cases against this particular decision because they've been asking for a refund. They've challenged the constitutionality of these tariffs and they've been demanding a refund from a long time. Now, the Supreme Court has not given any clarity on the refund, whether the tariffs which have already been collected, would it be refunded to the ones who incurred that cost? Because in some cases, the foreign exporters have borne the cost, while in most cases, it's the importers who have borne the tariff cost. In some instances, the foreign exporters also have borne the burden of the additional tariffs. So, will the money collected by the US, which amounts to nearly 130 to 150 billion dollars at least, will it be refunded? That is the next big question. And the Supreme Court has given no clarity in this regard. But definitely the option is available. It has not ruled out the possibility of a refund. And this means there will be many more cases which will come up, and this could create a very embarrassing situation for the Trump administration, right? Because the entire economic agenda of the Trump administration is based on these tariffs, based on the claim that the Trump administration is protecting the US government and protecting US economic interests to bring back manufacturing back into the US and to deal with the so called unfair trade policies of the other countries. So, this entire narrative that the US government has built collapses in the face of this judgment of the Supreme Court. And if at all a refund is ordered, then that would be even more embarrassing for the Trump administration. Now, the question is, what has been the impact of these tariffs? Who has really borne this burden? So, to understand that, we need to learn a concept called tariff incidence. Who actually paid for these tariffs over the last 1 year? See, there are two possibilities when such tariffs are levied as to who will bear the tariff incidence. One, of course, as all of you can understand, it would be American importers who would have initially paid upfront for the additional tariff. Let's say uh, a chair which was exported from India, maybe it was at $100. Now, suddenly Trump brings in, let's assume, 20-30% tariffs. So, that additional tariff of $20-30 would have been borne by the US importer. And of course, they'll pass it down to the US consumer. So, eventually, the cost of that chair was imported would go up. And the US consumer, if they want to buy it, they have to pay the additional cost, incurring the tariff burden. So, in such cases, tariff incidence is primarily on the importers first, who will later pass it down to the consumers, which means the US citizens and the American people were bearing the entire cost, though it is denied by the Trump administration. There is a second possibility as well, where the exporters will bear the tariff incidence, because exporters would fear that if they keep the prices at the same level and if additional tariffs are imposed, they might lose the market. Why would consumers pay an additional cost? Or there could be other competitors who are producing at a cheaper cost and they might get a advantage in the market. So, in order to retain their market competitiveness and to ensure that consumers are not burdened, exporters also might decide to cut the price. Let's say the Indian chair manufacturer, right, who was selling the chair previously at $100, they might reduce the chair price to maybe $80, right? So they will take the cut so that even after paying tariffs, the price eventually for the American consumer would remain the same, which will help the exporter to protect the market, to protect their competitiveness. So this is another possibility where the exporter will take upon the tariff burden by cutting the price of the product itself. So studies have shown as to how this has played out over the last 1 year. The data clearly shows that the tariff incidence on foreign exporters has been minimal. In the January to August period, hardly 6% of the tariff burden was borne by the exporters, which meant most exporters had not cut the prices because the price margins are very tight and there was no possibility of cutting prices further. So the entire tariff burden, almost 94% of it, was borne by American importers, which means they would have passed it down to American consumers. This slightly increased in the coming months, with 8 to 14% of the burden borne by foreign exporters, with still majority of the burden being borne by the importers and the American consumers. Though Trump administration denies this is the fact, this is the reality on the ground. The tariff burden has been largely passed down to the American consumers. They are lifting the heavy weight, while some foreign exporters have cut prices, but this is very, very nominal. So now the question is, all the tariff amount which has been collected, which amounts to 130 to 150 billion dollars, could be even touching 200 billion dollars, would it be refunded by the US government? Because that would be only fair following the ruling of the Supreme Court that these tariffs are unconstitutional. So now, if you look at the data again, India is owed up to around $487 million. Let's round it off to $500 million. If at all a refund is eventually provided, then this is what is owed to Indian exporters. That is the tariff burden that we have incurred over the past year. Approximately around $500 million owed for India. Now, again, coming back to the same question, would the Trump administration gracefully accept the judgment? Would they follow through and would they do the right thing by refunding the tariff amount collected? But of course, I think all of you know the answer to this. If you saw Trump's statements yesterday after the Supreme Court's ruling, I think that tells everything. Donald Trump called the judgment an embarrassment, and he even called out the judges, and he said he's ashamed of those judges. If someone were to say that in India, they would be inviting contempt charges, right? Now, of course, this puts the executive on the path of direct collision with the judiciary. And going by the way the Trump administration has been acting, this could even possibly, right, possibly lead to a constitutional crisis of sorts with the executive not following the orders of the judiciary. But of course, there might be some sort of a middle ground which will be worked out because there are few bypass arrangements that are available. In fact, Donald Trump has already started using this. Immediately after the Supreme Court judgment, Donald Trump has signed another executive order imposing 10% tariffs in addition to the tariffs that were previously announced. Since previous tariffs will now cease to be in operation following the Supreme Court's ruling, 10% tariff has been already signed into an executive order by Donald Trump by using other legal provisions which are available. See, the Emergency Law of 1977, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, that gave extraordinary power to the US president because any economic policy decisions under that law would have an immediate effect. It would have better enforcement. That's why that legal provision was used by the US president. But now, since the Supreme Court has shut off that route, there are other options available as well. But they will take more time to implement. It's more harder to enforce. For example, you have the Trade Act of 1974, the Tariff Act of 1930. They do provide legal options to the US administration to explore these routes to levy tariffs. They can use targeted tariffs on specific sectors. For example, you might have heard of American tariffs on steel and aluminum imports into the country. They are primarily levied through the Tariff Act. They are sectoral, specific to certain industries. And this has already been challenged in the US by several companies in the US as well. But of course, these other legal routes are available to the US president. Especially the Trade Act provisions can be used to levy up to 10 to 15% tariffs for 150 days in case the US faces a balance of payments crisis or if there is a fear of devaluation of US dollar. So now the additional 10% tariff that President Trump has signed after the Supreme Court judgment is primarily through this route. The 10% tariff is likely to remain in effect for another 150 days. Then through the Tariff Act, there is again a extraordinary power with the US president. If other countries are resorting to discriminatory practices, even up to 50% import tariffs can be considered and levied by the US president. But again, the problem here is the timeline taken for implementation, the extent of its enforcement. It may not be as effective as it was under the emergency law. But now the Supreme Court having shut down that route, this might be the other option which will be explored by the Trump administration to bypass the Supreme Court's judgment. Of course, there's no possibility of bringing out a new law, right? Because that would require a lot of support within the US Congress. And the Republican Party and the Trump presidency may not enjoy that kind of support. So they will explore these other options available through existing laws and they will try to continue the tariffs in some way or the other. But without a doubt, it creates a sort of imbalance in the trade policy of the US. It creates a lot of uncertainty. And this will affect every country, including India. So this will possibly have implications for the interim trade agreement, which is supposed to be signed next month. Though Donald Trump has said yesterday that nothing changes for the India US trade agreement, he has already signed an executive order calling for new 10% tariffs, which would obviously apply on India as well. So, would that mean the tariffs on India would be 18% plus 10%? So, there's no clarity on that, right? How would this play out? India would also wait and watch. India would not possibly rush into signing the trade agreement given the Supreme Court's judgment in the US because many countries have welcomed this decision. Many European countries, Canada, they have praised the US Supreme Court for this ruling. In fact, US markets have reacted very positively because if refunds are initiated to US importers, that would translate into a lot of economic gain for US companies. And it has already resulted in a very big surge in US stock prices. So, still, there's a lot of clarity that is required over here. But one thing is for sure that United States under Trump may not bow down to the Supreme Court's ruling. As I said, they will try to find ways to continue the tariff policy. But it does have implications for the trade policy of US. It creates a lot of uncertainty. And particularly for India, it complicates the path towards the trade deal, which had just been announced. So India would probably wait and watch for some time, probably try and delay the signing of the interim trade agreement for few days, few weeks to see how things would play out. So this is what we need to know as of now. Of course, it's a developing story, and as there are more updates, we will cover the topic in greater detail. Now, please take up this mains practice question based on what we have discussed. Please write an answer to this question and practice your answer writing. You need to basically analyze, examine the impact of the Supreme Court's ruling on the trade tariffs of Donald Trump's presidency. How does it affect the global economic environment? What could be the impact on India? Right? How would this uncertain trade environment affect India's exports to the US? That is something you need to explore in this particular answer. Now, let's move on to the next article. There's a very interesting article today on page number 8. This column explores the sentiments of the Gen Z and how the Gen Z might hold hope for protecting democratic order and principles across the world. Because across the world, you see a trend that is probably going against democratic principles, right? A rise of authoritarianism, rise of protectionism, then increasing hostility, direct threat to democratic principles and democratic order and liberal world order. So, as the traditional world order is being upended and the rules are being rewritten, the writer feels that the world is headed towards a very chaotic, uncertain path. And in this world, the Gen Z could possibly present a new hope to restore the democratic strength and to rebuild the democratic fabric of societies across the world. So that is the assessment the writer is providing. So the Gen Z or Generation Z, they fall into a specific age bracket. Those born between 1997 to 2012 are often labeled as Gen Z. Recently, we have seen several youth led protests across the world, which were even popularly dubbed as the Gen Z protests, which even brought out revolutions, transformative regime changes across the world. We saw this happening in our own neighborhood, starting with Bangladesh in 2024, how a student led protest toppled Sheikh Hasina's government. We saw this recently play out in Nepal, where KP Oli's government was toppled by the Gen Z led protests, which has brought out major political changes and reforms. And across the world, the impact of such Gen Z protests have been seen from Indonesia to Philippines, from Morocco to Madagascar, from Mexico to Italy. Multiple countries have seen such large scale protests, largely organized on social media. These are leaderless protests, faceless protests, primarily spread through social media and largely seen as organic, not fueled by any external or opposition forces, but largely organic. It's a organic outburst of the anger, the frustration of the younger generation against the political class and against the establishment, which is failing to respond to their ambitions and aspirations. Now, this is something which could play out in any part of the world, including in countries like India. If the state, the society, doesn't pay attention to the ambition and the aspirations of the younger generation. See, generally, there is a big disconnect between the younger generation and the older generations, be it the boomers or Gen X and Gen Y, right, who fall under the older category, primarily those who are in power, especially the traditional elites. They often complain that the younger generation is more entitled, privileged, that they are disconnected from the world. They don't like to have a social life. They're glued to their phones. That they often disrespect their elders, their culture. This is generally the presumption of the older generation, particularly the boomer generation, right? That younger generation doesn't hold the same ideology or values. They're not connected, rooted enough. That is generally the misconception that the older generation tends to have. While some part of it is true, that yes, Gen Z is more digitally well off, as in they have better digital connect, they can adapt to new technologies, they're glued to their screen and phones. Of course, they like lesser social interaction, they don't often respect traditional hierarchies. But this is the kind of disruption that you need to protect democratic liberal world order, according to the writer. Because the Gen Z, they are far more aware compared to older generations. They have better access to information. They focus on their individual growth and aspirations and career goals. When they see that there aren't enough opportunities for them, right? That is something which triggers the younger generation. They may be politically disconnected, they may not be ideologically inspired and motivated, but they do have a set of morals and values which drives them. It might seem very individualistic, but they know that the problems that they are facing today, the lack of employment, the poor environment that they are living in, right, is largely a result of the mismanagement, malgovernance of the older generations. So when they see rampant corruption, elitism, and misuse and abuse of power, eventually it will trigger the younger generation to rebel, to oppose those traditional hierarchies and disrupt the traditional order. Though it is chaotic and though it is episodic, it does act as a system of checks and balance against the ruling elites and the powerful. Because that's a reminder, clear reminder of what has happened in the last few months. It's a clear reminder for governments across the world that if you don't pay heed to the younger generation, if you don't fulfill their aspirations, you are going to witness such disruptions, such revolutions more often and more frequently. It may not be a long sustained campaign like the traditional revolutions that we have seen historically. For example, let's say even as recently as 2011, if you look at the Wall Street protests in the US, though it was more organized and sustained, right? Eventually, it also fizzled out without much of a real impact. It didn't really bring out any big economic or political change and reform in the US. Even if you look at the Arab Spring, the pro democracy revolutionary movement that spread across Middle East, North Africa in 2010, 2011, many have drawn parallels between the Gen Z protests and the Arab Spring movement. Because even Arab Spring movement was primarily fueled through social media. It was a pro democracy movement initially as it started out, or when it broke out in Tunisia, in North Africa, later spread to Egypt. It was primarily against dictatorship, massive corruption, unfulfilled aspirations. Social media gave a platform for airing that frustration, for organizing and mobilizing the people for protests. And it did topple these regimes. In Tunisia, the government fell. In Egypt, the infamous dictator Hosni Mubarak eventually fled the country. It did bring out political changes, but it did not result in concrete, long lasting changes. It has pushed those countries into greater chaos, and eventually, Arab Spring movement was hijacked by various regional and external powers. In fact, the later part of the Arab Spring, which spread to Libya, Syria, Yemen, and other parts of the Middle East, North Africa region, was largely inorganic. It was exploited by intelligence agencies, regional powers like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Israel, Iran, and global powers like US. And they tried to use this to topple regimes which didn't align with their geopolitical interests. How the Syrian civil war was fueled largely from the outside by those countries which were opposed to Iran, or what happened in Libya, right, was primarily a regime change intervention focused on removing Gaddafi from power. So Arab Spring movement very quickly lost its track and it took on a completely different trajectory. So when you look at any such recent organized protests, they've not really yielded concrete long-lasting results. Forget achieving a regime change. They're not even led to any concrete changes on the ground. But Gen Z protests that we have seen recently, they have been quite impactful, though they are chaotic, episodic. It happens once in a while, it's leaderless, it's not ideologically organized. But still, it has led to changes on the ground as seen in countries like Bangladesh and Nepal, but it fizzles out very quickly. But of course, it can recur, it can repeat, it can become a recurring feature if governments and the older generations don't respond to the needs and aspirations of the younger generation. This is where the leader Since it's largely a faceless, leaderless movement, the leader here would be every individual, every youth, part of the Gen Z, taking ownership of their action, driven by their own interests, fulfilling their own aspirations. And probably that could be what could save democratic world order across the world when there is a rise in authoritarianism and anti-democratic tendencies. That's what the writer believes, that we see a rise in protectionism, we see a rise in anti-democratic uh, credentials across the world. Most governments across the world are focusing on strengthening their authority, centralizing more powers, concentrating greater authority in their hands. And it could be leading to the erosion of a democratic liberal order. But the younger generation, the writer is very confident, will not accept this. If it doesn't result in any concrete changes for them individually, personally, if it does not fulfill their ambitions and goals, if it doesn't improve their standard of living, if it doesn't create career and livelihood opportunities for them, they will organize again and they will rebel. And it could be episodic, it could be once in a while, but it will bring about regular changes, regular churn in the society and in the democratic order, which could possibly be good in the long run. Though it could introduce an element of chaos and uncertainty, it is something which could act as a system of checks and balances against authoritarian tendencies. So that is the crux of this column. So please take up this article and this question so that you can practice your answer writing. Since UPSC tends to focus on changes happening in the society, a lot of questions have come on these lines, questions on work from home culture, right? And we have seen how UPSC has been adapting to changes happening in the society, and it's getting reflected in your question papers. So the problems facing Gen Z and the Gen Z protests across the world, that is something which is going to be a priority for the exams as well. So please treat this article with a lot of importance. Next, on page 8, we have another important article written by the director and representative of UNESCO in India. This article is focused on the importance of the mother language, promoting early education in one's own mother tongue based education, multilingual education. This is the entire focus of the article written by the regional director of UNESCO based out of India. Now, first, let's understand why this article has been brought out. See, today, that is 21st of February, is a very historic day. It is marked across the world as the International Mother Language Day. It is celebrated as the International Mother Language Day across the world to highlight the importance of one's native language, not just in early childhood learning in their formative years, but also the role of language, one's mother tongue, in shaping one's culture and identity. The celebration of this day goes all the way back to East Pakistan. It was on this day, 21st February in 1952, that something horrific happened in East Pakistan. The post independence, after India was partitioned in 1947, Pakistan, which comprised of two entities, West and the East, it was always trying to subjugate and oppress East Pakistan through the domination of the West Pakistan elite. So in 1948, under Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the West Pakistani elite, primarily the Punjabi elite of West Pakistan, who were trying to exert their dominance over the Bengalis in East Pakistan, they tried to enforce a one language formula. They tried to erase the linguistic identity of the Bengalis by imposing the Urdu language on the majority Bengali speakers in East Pakistan. Any such imposition which threatens one's linguistic regional identity would obviously be resisted, opposed, and fought back. So the Bengalis in East Pakistan, they rebelled against this decision to impose Urdu on them. Bengali was not even treated at the same level as that of Urdu. It was not given the same treatment as a national language. And Urdu was enforced on the Bengali speakers. So primarily the Bengali students, they organized large scale movements. And eventually this movement was crushed by the Pakistani forces. On 21st February 1952, that's when large scale atrocities were carried out in East Pakistan by Pakistani forces. They tried to crush the language movement, and they brutally killed many student leaders and injured hundreds and hundreds of activists who were trying to fight for the Bengali identity and oppose the Urdu imposition. So it is this day which is celebrated and marked as a tribute to the Bengali student leaders in East Pakistan in 1952 who stood for their mother tongue, their language, and fought for their identity. So after the liberation of Bangladesh, many years later, under Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, Bangladesh proposed to UNESCO to recognize this historic day as the International Mother Language Day. So this proposal was accepted and adopted by UNESCO in 1999, and even the UN General Assembly adopted this in 2002. So since then, 21st Feb of every year is marked and celebrated as International Mother Language Day. So it is promoted across the world by the UN to identify the role of one's mother language and mother language based education and the importance of multilingual education, especially in early schooling. Because studies have clearly established that children learn better, their pedagogy, their overall learning outcomes improve when they learn initially in their native mother tongues and if they're exposed to a multilingual learning environment. So, on this basis, the writer, who's the representative of UNESCO in India, talks about India's rich linguistic diversity, the need to protect, conserve, and promote India's linguistic diversity, and what initiatives can be taken in coordination with UNESCO to promote mother language based learning and multilingual education in India's educational system. See, India is home to around 1,300 plus languages, according to the 2011 census. The Constitution, under the 8th schedule, recognizes 22 national languages with multiple dialects and variants spoken across the country. And we are home to one of the most linguistic, linguistically diverse societies in the world. So the writer acknowledges this beautiful linguistic diversity of India, from Northeast India to western parts of India to southern parts of India, and how UNESCO is aiding and assisting India to promote mother language based learning. The UNESCO publishes a very unique report for India. Please make a note of this for your prelims. It's called the State of the Education Report for India. There could be a prelims question: who publishes this report? State of the Education Report for India is published by UNESCO. Now, under the report, the seventh edition of the report, which was brought out last year, it's titled Bhasha Matters, meaning language matters. So, under this, the theme is mother tongue and multilingual education. Promoting mother tongue based and multilingual education is seen as the right way forward to groom our children, improve their learning outcomes, and also strengthen their sense of identity. Because when you learn in your mother tongue or mother tongue based education is promoted and students are later opened up for multilingual education, it cultivates better respect for one's own culture and identity, for one's own traditions, makes them more rooted, and exposes them later to different languages, which could also build the spirit of respect towards the other linguistic uh, profile of India, towards the diversity that's seen in our languages that are spoken in the country. In fact, pedagogic studies have repeatedly established this. It's a very pedagogically sound concept to promote mother tongue based learning and introduce multilingual education at a very early level, right? So it can be a transformative tool to improve learning outcomes. Research has shown that this has implications for a student's learning ability, even with regard to foundational concepts like mathematics, numeracy, basic data skills, and literacy levels will see a bigger jump when mother tongue based multilingual education is promoted. Because eventually, when students feel disconnected, right, if they're taught in alien languages from the beginning, if their mother tongues are ignored, it leads to a sense of isolation, a sense of alienation for the students. And this affects their confidence levels. It increases the dropout levels in schools as well. There's a direct correlation between being taught from early days with a foreign language, with the alien language which a student doesn't connect with, right? And the eventual dropout rate seen in the schooling system. There exists a direct correlation between them. According to NCRT data from 2022, 44% of our students in our early education system, their mother tongue is different from the medium of instruction being taught in school. Now, this is a significant gap which needs to be addressed, right? Because mainstream languages are being promoted, right? Mainstream languages at the state level, of course, languages like English and Hindi, but the other smaller languages which could be spoken at the local, regional level is largely getting ignored. And many students often feel disconnected within the schooling system from the early days itself. This has a direct impact on their pedagogical outcomes and their learning outcomes. It affects their aptitude, their uh, adaptation of their focus levels with regard to even other languages and other subjects from math to science eventually gets degraded, and it has directly translated into greater dropout levels in the schooling system, as it affects one's confidence, as it leads to greater isolation of those students. That's why it's very, very essential to plug those gaps and address the dropout levels by focusing on mother tongue based education and multilingual education from early years. Ensure that children are taught in their mother tongues as much as possible at the early schooling level, and open up them to a multilingual environment where they can pick up two, three different languages, which improves their overall pedagogy. The writer appreciates India's initiatives and policies, such as the National Education Policy, which tries to promote the very same principle. Though there's a big controversy surrounding it, it's alleged by certain states that the center is trying to impose Hindi on non Hindi states. Though the national education policy doesn't talk about Hindi imposition, the center is accused by several opposition ruled states that different government schemes are being misused to pressurize states to adopt Hindi as one of the languages at the school level. That controversy apart, the national education policy does create a framework for promoting mother tongue based education and multilingual education. Then we also have the national curriculum framework of 2022 and 2023, which promotes the same idea of mother tongue based education from the early days of one's schooling. At the state level, a lot of good initiatives have been taken up. For example, in Odisha, there is a multilingual education program that spans different tribal languages depending on each district. Because, see, in Odisha, you have multiple tribes, and the schooling system takes this into account and promotes a multilingual education system at the district level. And it percolates down to the district to the Gram Sabha level. In Telangana, there is greater focus on using digital tools such as Diksha, the digital infrastructure for knowledge sharing, to make multilingual language resources accessible to students and teachers. And it also shows how digital tools can enable a multilingual education environment. Because sometimes the biggest challenge in introducing multiple languages would be the lack of teachers and lack of resources. This is where digital technology and AI can solve the problem. For example, recently the government of India has rolled out Bashini, which is a multilingual AI language based platform that can churn out learning resources in vernacular languages. Then we also have PM Vidya, Adivani initiatives of the central government, AI for Bharat, a community led language platform. It shows the fusion of digital technology with AI tools could give access and greater inclusion and equity for students and teachers as well, giving them access to different resources which are needed at the grassroots level. So that is something which should be prioritized according to the writer in India's schooling system. Now, before we end this topic, let me give you some basic facts about UNESCO, which can be important for your prelims. The UNESCO is the leading educational, scientific, and cultural organization of the UN. It is one of the specialized agencies of the UN. There are around 15 specialized agencies under the UN, and UNESCO is one of them, functioning under the ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council, which is a primary organ of the UN. So, under the ECOSOC, all these specialized agencies function under it, and UNESCO is one of them. Established in 1945, headquartered in Paris, and it mainly focuses on promoting education, promoting natural sciences, humanities, social and human sciences, culture, communication, and information. 194 member countries are part of it, with 12 associate members. Clear? Now, UNESCO runs some very popular initiatives, such as the Man and Biosphere Program, through which biosphere reserves are recognized through the UNESCO's network. Then we have the World Heritage Site program, where natural, cultural heritage sites are recognized. Then you also have the Intangible Heritage List maintained by UNESCO. So it's through these global initiatives that UNESCO is promoting the conservation, protection of culture, promotion of scientific education, and promotion of better access to learning for children across the world. And UNESCO plays a very key role in this aspect. Now, coming to the next article on page 14, there's an interview with the Brazilian president, Lula da Silva, who was in India for the AI Impact Summit. So the Hindu has published the detailed expert of this interview, which helps us understand the core tenets of India-Brazil relationship. This is one of the most important relationships in the global south. The two countries have tremendous potential to step up their economic ties and their strategic cooperation, and they can become leaders of the entire global south. They can help defend developing countries and underdeveloped countries, stand up for their interests, act as a voice for the global south, to stand up against the developed industrialized world. That is where the true potential of the India Brazil relationship lies in. In fact, President Lula da Silva shares great connect with India. Previously, even under the Manmohan Singh government, India Brazil, they exchanged a lot of best practices with each other. India learned from Brazil's socio-economic programs, especially the conditional cash transfer schemes that were rolled out by the UPA government. It had some inspiration from the Brazilian model. Brazil also learned from India's experience in dealing with public distribution, with employment schemes, agriculture initiatives. So there's a lot of commonality that exists between us, common threats, common interests, which drives one of the two large democracies of the world. Brazil is also like a gateway for us to make a big opening into the Latin America region. And the two countries share a historical relationship that goes back to the colonial times under the Portuguese. The Portuguese played a very big role in introducing several vegetables, right, from Brazil to India. Some of the top vegetables we consume in India today, from potatoes to tomato to chilies, they're largely of Brazilian origin, introduced by the Portuguese from Brazil to India. Right today, you can't even imagine Indian cuisine without these staples, and most of them are essentially from Brazil, brought under the colonial rule. Even cashew nuts, sweet potato, and tapioca as well. From India, the Portuguese took primarily cattle. It became a big source of strength for Brazil's animal husbandry industry. Right, if Brazil could become largely self-sufficient in milk production, it was because of Indian cattle, which could better adopt and adapt to the tropical conditions there compared to the European breed of cattle. So the Portuguese colonizers, they took Indian breeds of cattle such as the Nellore, Ongole, and the Gir breed, which were widely adapted in Brazil's ecosystem. So there's a lot of historical close colonial connect that binds us together. So today, as two large democracies, we have some common concerns and common interests. But however, the bilateral trade is way below its potential. The bilateral trade currently is just around $15 billion. I mean, India is a country with 1.4 billion population. Brazil has 215 million, making them two of the largest democracies, right? Vibrant democracies as well. And they all face a lot of socio-economic challenges. Just like India deals with high levels of poverty, challenges in education, healthcare, in urban governance, in sanitation, similar problems are present in Brazil as well. So, with regard to our development profile, we are pretty much on the same path. So, that makes India, Brazil, two of the big emerging economies which can truly represent the interests of the global south, which can truly represent the developing, underdeveloped world, give them a voice at global platforms like United Nations. So the primary focus of the relationship today is to step up the trade and economic ties. Today, there are a lot of Indian companies investing and operating in Brazil, in the LATAM market. Even Brazilian companies are opening up to India, but there is a lot of potential which is still left because the trade volume doesn't justify um, the potential which exists. right? Even Lula da Silva has acknowledged the same challenge which is present in the relationship. So when the Brazilian leader came to India for the AI Impact Summit, he brought with him one of the biggest trade delegations. More than 600 Brazilian leaders from the private industry were brought in to build partnerships between the private industries, because the private industries of India, Brazil, they have enormous opportunities to collaborate with each other, from the field of artificial intelligence to agri-tech to fintech to other key sectors like textiles, pharmaceuticals, and small, micro, medium enterprises. There's tremendous opportunity available on both the sides to scale up this partnership. So that economic aspect and trade aspect of the relationship is the top priority of both the sides. And apart from that, we have some global issues of common concern, such as reforms of the United Nations. Reforming the UN has been at the top of the agenda. In fact, India, Brazil, we are part of an informal club called G4, where India and Brazil are championing the reforms of the UN along with Japan and Germany. And they're demanding a permanent seat for themselves at the UN Security Council. They are even calling for a complete reform of the structure and the functioning of the UN with increased representation for Africa as well. It's completely unrepresented at the UNSC. So G4 countries are championing the reforms of the United Nations. They have belief and faith in multilateralism. Lula da Silva says that in a world where multilateralism is being threatened and dismantled by countries like US, Russia, China, and others, India, Brazil, they provide hope to global South to support and protect multilateral world order. Because that's the only way out for the emerging economies, developing and underdeveloped countries to collectively act together and protect their interests. We have seen such active collaboration between India, Brazil, even with regard to climate change talks. We were part of a group called the BASIC with China, Brazil, and South Africa, where India, Brazil, along with South Africa, China, gave leadership at the climate change talks of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are also part of another grouping called IPSA, three democracies from three continents: Brazil from South America, South Africa from Africa, India from Asia, working together under the IPSA framework, focusing on economic ties and strategic defense relations as well. Today, India, Brazil have a good defense engagement which has started. In fact, India has even bought defense platforms from Brazil, and India is looking to export defense hardware to Brazil as well. We even have a joint military exercise under IPSA initiative called IPSAMR with South Africa as well. So there are a lot of common areas that are present, especially now given Trump's tariff threats. Brazil also has been threatened with 50% tariffs like India. So that is something which brings us together, keeps us aligned. And we are, of course, part of the BRICS grouping, which is another commonality. So last year's presidency of BRICS was with Brazil, and now it has passed on to India. India will be hosting this year's BRICS summit. So a lot of coordination would be required between India and Brazil to drive BRICS as a new alternative for multilateralism and to try and move away from Western dependency. India, Brazil are also looking to reduce their dependency on the US dollar and the Western controlled financial systems like World Bank and IMF. So all these are common interests which were discussed during the president's visit to India. Another important development is the proposed free trade agreement between India and Mercosur. Mercosur is a trade bloc in Latin America, right? A trade bloc led by Brazil. India already has a preferential trade agreement with this Latin American trade bloc. So we are in talks currently to finalize a full-fledged free trade agreement. See, India has recently been on a FTA spree. We've signed multiple FTAs in the last 5 years, right? With UAE, with Australia, with Mauritius, more recently with European Union, then with EFTA countries, with Oman, with New Zealand, an interim trade agreement with the US. So India is prioritizing such trade agreements. Same with Brazil. You know, in recent months, Brazil also has signed FTAs with European Union, with EFTA countries, and even with Singapore. So Brazil is very eager to finalize a FTA with India through the Mercosur trade bloc, which represents the collective economic interests of South American and Latin American countries. So this preferential trade agreement, which I'm referring to, it was brought out in 2009 by the then Manmohan Singh government. Under this, preferential treatment was given for certain tariff lines, for certain export lines from India to Latin America region and vice versa. Tariffs were reduced to nominal levels, and this had helped increase the trade between India and Latin America region. But there is still a lot of potential left, and the goal is to eliminate most of the tariffs, provide duty-free access to most of the tariff lines, along with added benefits through a full-fledged free trade agreement. So this is what India is negotiating with Mercosur Group today. So please make basic notes about the Mercosur Group. This could also be a prelims question. It's a Latin American trade bloc established through the Treaty of Asuncion in 1991 and the Protocol of Oro Preto in 1994. The key members are Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Bolivia, which joined recently in 2024. Venezuela was also a member, but it was suspended in 2016-17 because of its rise of authoritarianism under Nicolas Maduro. And as of now, it remains suspended from the group, though it is listed as a member. It has several associate members from across the Latin America region. It has South American countries like Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and others. It also has Central American countries like Panama. Then you also have Peru and Suriname from South America. So this is one of the biggest trade blocs of the Latin America region. India already has a preferential trade agreement. So now the goal is to finalize a full-fledged free trade agreement. So moving on, let's talk about another important article in today's paper that focuses on the FDI inflow and outflow into India. The RBI report dealing with FDI flows, it has some positive news and some concerning news as well. So the data of RBI is for December 2025. According to the data, there has been a net negative flow of FDI with around $1.6 billion leaving India in net terms for the month of December 2025. And this is happening for the fourth consecutive month. For the fourth straight month, India is registering a net FDI flow which is negative, the negative territory, meaning the outward flow is more than the inward flow of FDI. So this is quite concerning. So we need to understand what's happening here. See, on the flow of FDI into India, foreign direct investment, right, which is seen as more stable capital, which can help in long-term capital creation. The inward flow has actually increased. It has reached a record level. In the month of December, India received a record level of inward flow of FDI, especially from Singapore, Netherlands, and Mauritius. They accounted for nearly 80% of the inward FDI flow, which has been one of the highest flows that we have seen in recent months. But the reason why still the net is negative is because the outward flow of FDI has jumped quite significantly. That's why it's in the negative category. The outward flow is because of the reparations by foreign investors, meaning they are basically pulling out their investments, divesting, diluting their investments, booking profits, heading towards better lucrative markets, all because of global uncertainty which is present. And also, Indian companies are investing abroad. The foreign investments of Indian companies has become more broad based and more aggressive. So there is a greater outward flow of FDI compared to the inward flow, though inward flow has reached record levels. So the outward flow is mainly towards countries such as Singapore, United States, United Arab Emirates, United Kingdom, and Netherlands. These are the top recipients of FDI from India. So this anomaly is hopefully a short-term trend according to the RBI, because there are many positive changes which have happened in the month of January. Right? India EU FTA, the interim trade agreement announced with the US. So those factors would reverse the FDI trend. We've already seen in the portfolio and the capital markets, FPI flow has jumped significantly for the month of February after the India EU FTA and the interim trade agreement announcement with the US. So similar trend would be seen probably in the FDI sector as well. But until December, there was this concerning trend where the net FDI flow was negative for 4 consecutive months, where outward flow was increasing and remaining higher than the inward flow FDI. Now, moving on to the prelim section, let's take a quick look. On the front page, we have an article that refers to the Vibrant Villages program as phase two of this ambitious initiative has been launched by Union Home Minister Amit Shah in Assam. We need not focus on all the other statements that were made by the Home Minister. It was largely political, aimed at the elections. But we will focus on this scheme, which is a very important initiative for border security and border management. The topic can be very important under internal security. So, what is this Vibrant Villages program? The VVP was first announced in the 2023 Union Budget and launched in 2023. It was meant to focus on the border villages facing China. Specifically, around 1,400 odd villages were chosen in the Union Territory of Ladakh, states of Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh. The border states facing China, they were part of phase one of Vibrant Villages program. Around 4,000 crores was set aside for the initiative. And the goal was to provide better infrastructure, better livelihood opportunities for the border population to counter China's village programs which are existing along the line of actual control. See, China has been building these so-called model villages, the Zhongpong model villages, right? China has been repopulating them and providing advanced facilities and infrastructure, increasing the border population to strengthen its claims. And this has been a concern for India. And also, if you don't focus on your border regions, since they are remote, inaccessible, they don't have adequate infrastructure and opportunities, usually the concern is it will get depopulated. Because of migration, the border population might move out to larger cities, seeking better opportunities, resulting in depopulation, which could even affect your claims in a disputed territory. And also, border population should act as the eyes and ears of the border guarding forces and the intelligence agencies to look out for any suspicious activity. And if the border population is unhappy, right, if they have a resentment against the government, against the security forces, they might end up getting involved in anti-national activities. They might work with organized criminal groups facilitating criminal activities, or they might work for the hostile forces, their intelligence agencies and armed forces, passing on intelligence to them. So to prevent that and to keep the border population in favor of the country, to ensure that they remain patriotic, you need to deliver on better governance, provide better infrastructure, facilities, and prevent the outward migration, the depopulation, and give them better standard of living, create economic opportunities and livelihood opportunities for them. So that has been the focus of the Vibrant Villages program. And initially under phase one, the focus was just on the China border. Now, India is expanding the focus of Vibrant Villages program under phase two of the initiative to cover all the land borders of India. So around 15 states will now get covered under phase two, from Gujarat to Rajasthan to Punjab to northeastern states, West Bengal, right? So all the land borders of India, the states facing Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and Myanmar, all of them will get covered under the initiative. And the main focus, as I said, is to provide better facilities and infrastructure and amenities. Around 6,800 crores has been set aside for second phase, with 1,900 villages chosen. And each village would be approximately getting 3 crores, which would be spent over the next 3 years. So please make a note of the Vibrant Villages program. So there is a parallel initiative as well called the Border Area Development Program, BADP, which has been in operation since 1980s, 1990s. This is also applied across all the land borders of India. Initially, it was applied only along the Pakistani border in the 1980s and 90s. Now it has been expanded to cover all the land borders of India. So the Border Area Development Program operates in parallel to Vibrant Villages Program. So please read about the BADP as well and post some of the key points in your comment section below. The next article on page 1, the Delhi High Court has upheld the right to life with dignity, the right to have access to a clean environment, clean, hygienic environment. It has again been reiterated as part of fundamental right guaranteed under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. See, the higher judiciary, the Supreme Court and High Courts, have expanded the definition of Article 21 over the years, and it has been well accepted that right to live a life with dignity, right to having access to clean, hygienic environment is part of your right to life. This has been reiterated by the Delhi High Court in a very interesting case. A petitioner had approached the court for protection of this fundamental right, and he alleged that the local civic body, which had built a public urinal and had placed an open garbage bin next to his house, it was violating his fundamental right by exposing him to an unclean, unsafe, unhygienic environment. So Delhi High Court has agreed with the petitioner and directed the civic body to demolish both of them. So this can be a landmark ruling again. Of course, this is not a new interpretation. It has always existed. Uh, but the enforcement of this could give fresh hope for many litigants across the country to deal with unclean, unsafe, unhygienic environment because of poor governance and ensure that this fundamental right is enforced through the provisions of Article 21. Next, on page 4, a village in Maharashtra, Bela Gram, has become the first net emission zero village in India. Please make a note. This is a very big achievement. This village in the Vidarbha region, the Bandara district, has become the first village panchayat in the country to become a net zero village panchayat. They've mainly focused on clean alternatives. They've moved away from dirty fuel, adopting cleaner sources of energy. They've adopted solar, moved away from smoky chullas for cooking to LPG. They have focused on plantation drives and afforestation initiatives, waste segregation. They've banned single use plastic at the village level. So, this village panchayat has taken the lead with regard to dealing with emissions and pollution as well. And it has emerged as the first net zero village panchayat of India. It was even recognized for its efforts with the Rashtriya Panchayat Puraskar in 2024. So now it has officially become the first village, not just in Maharashtra, but across India to achieve the net zero status. Next, India has taken part in the Board of Peace for Gaza as an observer state. This is a Trump led initiative to focus on rebuilding, reconstruction of Gaza after the Gaza war comes to an end. And President Trump had invited several countries, including India, to join this initiative. The Board of Peace currently consists of few countries such as Argentina, Armenia, Azerbaijan, even Pakistan, right? Saudi Arabia, and few other Middle Eastern powers like UAE and Qatar. Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, then Morocco from Africa, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Turkey, again from West Asia. All these countries have accepted the membership, and yesterday in Washington, D.C., the Board of Peace was inaugurated, which basically has Donald Trump himself as the chairman of the board. It also has an executive board led by former British PM Tony Blair and Trump's son in law, Jared Kushner, along with the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio and his lead envoy for West Asia, Steve Witkoff, and even the World Bank president, Ajay Banga, and others. So, the Board of Peace and its executive board, they will act as the International Transition Authority, essentially to stabilize Gaza, to reconstruct and rehabilitate Palestinians. But of course, this is all conditional. It's based on the complete disarmament of Hamas and surrender of Hamas. Israel has said it will not allow any of the reconstruction activities to get started unless and until Hamas completely surrenders. Hamas has rejected a complete surrender proposal. So the Board of Peace has now been inaugurated officially with its first ever formal meeting taking place. And India, which had been invited, it has played it very safe as part of our balanced policy towards Israel-Palestine issue. India has only participated as an observer, but not as a member of the Board of Peace. India's deputy chief of mission in the Indian embassy in US in Washington has participated as an observer. So this again is in line with our balanced, consistent policy on Israel-Palestine issue. See, recently, Israel has courted controversy. Israel has come out with new land laws, which basically allows for the Jewish settlers to illegally capture and occupy Palestinian land in West Bank. And this was opposed by many global powers. They've even brought out a resolution. So India was quite careful because in another few days, PM Modi is visiting Israel. So India can't be outright condemning Israel as well, though we recognize these Jewish settlements as illegal settlements. India officially recognizes all the occupied territories by Israel. from West Bank to Gaza to Golan Heights. But when all the other global powers came out with this resolution at the UN, India did not directly participate when the joint declaration was being made. But later we signed the same statement. India became one of the signatories condemning these actions of Israel, which is illegal under international law, which is enabling illegal Jewish settlements in West Bank. So this again highlights the tightrope walk, the diplomatic tightrope that India walks when it comes to the Israel-Palestine issue. So India has been quite cautious and careful in accepting this invite. So though India was invited as a member, we have not joined as a member. We have just participated as an observer with regard to the Board of Peace proceedings. Next, India has announced the formal entry into the Pax Silica initiative. At the AI Impact Summit, India has formally joined the Pax Silica initiative, to which India was invited recently, just last month, by the US ambassador to India. So, what is this Pax Silica? Pax Silica is a US led initiative to create a trust based alliance for critical minerals and supply chains for electronics industry to build resilience and reduce dependency on China. So, especially those countries aligned with the US have realized the threat they face by depending on China dominated supply chains. Recently, see how, with regard to critical minerals, semiconductors, and electronics. So, to create parallel supply chains and reduce dependency on China, such initiatives are being floated. The Biden administration had pushed the Mineral Security Partnership, the MSP, to which India had joined later. So now the Trump administration has pushed the Pax Silica initiative that includes Greece, Australia, Japan, South Korea, UK, Singapore, Israel, Netherlands, Qatar, UAE, and now India has also formally joined the Pax Silica initiative. Now, for India, there were some concerns. See, first of all, we were not invited for the inaugural edition. It was inaugurated in December 2025 itself, but India was not initially considered by the US. It was only in January 2026 that the invite was extended to India. See, that's because most powers in the group, they have something unique to offer. US is already a major leader in semiconductors and in the technology domain. Then countries like Japan, South Korea, they're already part of the Chip 4 or the Fab 4 alliance and are the leading producers of semiconductor chips. Same with UK and Singapore. They are leading countries when it comes to electronics, semiconductors, and new technology, including AI. Same with Israel. It's a major leader in electronics, semiconductor, and AI industry. Countries like Netherlands, they have a monopoly over lithography. Only one Dutch company which has complete monopoly over the lithography machines that are produced, which are used to carve out your GPUs or graphic processing units, which is the bread and butter of AI data centers. So every country here has something unique to offer and something to leverage. Like Qatar and UAE have massive funds which they can pump to the initiative. So India was quite hesitant. Though India has similar concerns with regard to dependency on China controlled supply chains, our fear is we should not end up depending on a Western controlled supply chain because even that could be unreliable, especially if it is led by the US under President Trump. So, after weighing all the options, India has decided to join the initiative as India could also benefit and contribute to the initiative. India has massive manpower, right? India can help in building the application layer of AI. India can help in securing access to certain key resources, setting up processing facilities, refinement facilities, and India can even become a key market for these products. So, after a careful consideration, India has decided to join the Pax Silica initiative. Now, coming to the last topic for today, the PAC, Public Accounts Committee, one of the most powerful parliamentary committees. It has criticized the government for poorly implementing the SANKALP scheme. So, what is the SANKALP scheme? It was first approved by the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, headed by the Prime Minister in 2017. And SANKALP is primarily focused on skill development. The flagship scheme of the Ministry of Skill Development, it stands for skill acquisition and knowledge awareness for livelihood promotion. So that's the expansion of this acronym. The focus was on short term training to inculcate the right skills, to make our youth industry ready, plug the gap between higher education and the demands of the industry, and create long term employment livelihood opportunities. But in the implementation of Sankalp, there have been several shortcomings which were flagged even by the CAG, the Comptroller Auditor General of India. The CAG also had flagged the poor implementation of SANKALP scheme and the uh, improper utilization of the funds. So now similar concerns have been raised by the Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament, which is one of the most powerful parliamentary committees. So what is the PAC? The Public Accounts Committee, it is constituted every year. It has a term of just 1 year. It is constituted every year and it consists of 22 members, 15 from the Lok Sabha, 7 from the Rajya Sabha. So it has representation from both houses of the parliament, and the chairman of this committee is chosen by the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. And it's been a convention, a sort of a practice, a parliamentary convention since 1967, that the chairman's position of the PAC is always given to a leader from the opposition party who is elected to this committee. So it's always given to the opposition, the chair's position, so that they can hold the executive accountable for its financial decisions and financial action. So it's one of the most powerful committees which can scrutinize government spending and expenditure, government schemes and its implementation, and raise any red flags and hold the executive accountable over its financial decisions. So, with this, we bring today's analysis to an end. If you have liked the session, understood all the topics, do press the like button, share your comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.